feel the pain, feel the grief, feel the shame, feel the guilt, feel all those things, go through the feelings. But humor and play is what's going to help us through this, particularly when it comes from a place of love.
Welcome, Pathfinders and all wandering wanderers, eager to explore paths to better tech futures together. We are Tethic's Firekeepers, Alja Isakovic and Matthew Mitka, inviting you to embark on another playful, meandering exploration of the lunacy of tech. You can find more about us and ways of joining our pathfinding adventure at tethix.co/pathfinders. In this episode, we want to shift our attention back to our human bodies, which seems fitting for the first episode of 2025, a year in which we can no longer take our bodily autonomy for granted. A year in which it's painfully obvious how different rules are for bodies with a high net worth than for the rest of us who can barely afford to play Monopoly as a board game. A year in which the Zucks and other rich fucks continue to pity our bodies against each other and AI bots because all they care about are engagement stats, not actual human connection. A year in which an app that allows bodies to collectively share lived experiences is considered a threat to national security. So perhaps it is a radical act in 2025 to reground and reroute back into our bodies. In the special Black Moon edition of our New Moon's letter, we wrote, "The fire practitioners of Silicon Valley might consider our bodies a bug in the system, a flaw to eliminate. We're inviting you to reconnect with your body and the bodies around you, and be curious about everything our bodies can do that defies logic and cannot yet be imitated by software running on silicon. And to pay attention to what is happening to all our bodies as we spend an increasing amount of time in companionship with silicon bodies, and how different our bodies, both human and more than human, feel when they connect with each other through direct touch." Even though our bodies are not in direct contact or even proximity, we'd like to invite your body, whether you're watching us on YouTube or just listening to our disembodied voices, to tune into our energetic frequencies as we explore today's guiding question. How do our human bodies fit into an AI-enabled future? Welcome back, Matt. How is your body feeling today?
Good to be back. My body is feeling good.
Still alive?
I'm still alive. Still alive. Monday's inauguration is upon us next week, and I've been doing more light yoga and stretching this week after injuring my back gardening on the weekend, the previous weekend, and I'm feeling good as a result of engaged in more of the embodied practices and less time in front of my screen. So feeling good.
Excellent. I've also been dancing through life lately, learning the choreo from the Wicked movie to distract me from all the news that's been affecting our bodies in very different ways. And on that note, let's perhaps begin today's exploration of how our human bodies are being shaped by silicon bodies, in particular those running AI. And obviously, when we say AI, we don't just mean generative AI that has been spreading like wildfire in the past couple of years, but also AI-powered algorithms that have been shaping our bodies for quite a while now, especially through social media. So what are some of your thoughts on human bodies and algorithms, AI-powered algorithms? How have these algorithms already shaped our human bodies?
Yeah, it's such a good question at this point in time. And thank you to Sister Moon for helping reveal this important question for us. And just like our food that we put into our bodies on a regular basis, and through this amazing, extraordinary process that we have in the complex system that is our body, we convert that into our bodies. and cellular respiration takes place, and cellular reproduction takes place. And you can think about our information ecology is in a similar way, and the information that we consume through, be that through social media or through anything that is algorithmically curated, we're going to be taking on some mimetic toxins that are a part of that whole ecology, just like in the way that toxins are part of our food production, be that because of the absorption of water from toxins that are in the water table, because of leaching from dumps. So I think it's influencing our bodies, probably at firstly at a psychological level, at an intellectual level, but also at a psychic level, like in terms of how we feel and connect to the greater unknowns of existence, and our broader social bodies. I mean, you can see the way that algorithms have shaped the social landscape over the part, the geopolitical landscape over, the political landscape, the cultural, the economic landscape over the past, couple of decades. And holy fucking moly, like, look at where we are, 2025, and what is happening. And Alia, you are way more on the pulse with these things. And what's been happening with like TikTok and the ban with TikTok is really, really fascinating as well.
Yeah, on the pulse is a nice way of saying chronically online. But yeah, it's interesting, particularly TikTok, right? That is being labeled as a threat to national security. I think mainly because it really allows bodies to connect, and it is. And if we're speaking about algorithms shaping our bodies and thinking, TikTok's algorithm particularly is tuned for connecting people. And I've been seeing a lot of really thoughtful analysis from US TikTok users, particularly who might be losing the app. And we still don't really know what's going to happen on Sunday, in just 2 days from when we are recording. So who knows? Maybe all of this will be just obsolete, and the ban will not go through because obviously now the Little Red Book app Shangshu. Apologies for any Chinese speaking people. I probably butchered that. It's becoming the number one app in the App Store as a basically form of protest, right? Because the US government and other governments obviously are probably taking note from that and trying to do the same. And they're obviously, worried about how people are sharing footage from the genocide in Gaza, even though hopefully we'll now get a ceasefire in that region, at least momentarily, if all goes well.
Yeah.
And they're afraid of that, right? And as opposed to other particularly meta-owned apps where they keep showing you just like the type of content that is safe and that's gonna keep you it's keeping you an obedient consumer that's gonna click on ads, or YouTube algorithm that's basically optimizing for rage and hate and radicalization. TikTok particularly is a platform for human bodies to share really their experiences and have conversations. And obviously, it seems like that's a radical act in 2025. But it's obviously nothing new, right? That technologies are shaping our bodies and that we adapt to new technologies. So it's worth noting that we did not invent technology in the Industrial Revolution or in the digital revolution. It's interesting that you started, for instance, with food, because the technology of cooking is one that really shaped humans in interesting ways, right? Our bodies then adapted to our food being cooked, and we have kind of evolved with that technology of cooking. And obviously language, which will be a connection to the technology of AI, is another amazing technology. And language is also shaping us, and we'll talk more about that probably later, because language is also shaped not only by how we use it, but is also emergent from the land where it emerges. And so it's interesting, right? Especially when we talk about digital technology, we often see them as removed from the physical world, and probably intentionally, right? That's a distraction to kind of make us forget that there's a ton of data centers that are involved in, the distribution of content, distribution of algorithms, even, just you there listening to our podcast, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening in your app, right? This content has gone probably through a data center that has also shaped the bodies of our land, from all the materials that are required that go into building and maintaining all of that physical infrastructure, to all the water that's required to cool these silicon bodies of internet, so that we can have these conversations. And it's interesting if we mention a bit what's currently going on. Obviously the wildfires in LA have been getting a lot of attention. A region where also nearby a lot of data centers reside that are using a lot of water. And so we're entering a future where we are needing an increasing amount of water to cool data centers, but also to put out all the wildfires that are starting due to our climate being shaped by all the activities of human bodies and silicon bodies that require all this energy, resources, and all of that.
Yeah, and that's the I mean, so firstly, taking the larger lens of like what technology is, and I constantly um, remind and have these conversations with my children when they use that word technology. The default is to talk about like apps and like the smartphone and like ChatGPT or what have you. And I make sure, and actually on the full moon, after our full moon gathering, I've got a ritual where I go out with the kids and we look up at the moon when we can see it. And it was a little bit cloudy earlier this week, but with Sister Moon up there shining beautifully in the sky, we had that conversation talking about technology, and even talking about our clothes, and the clothes that we've created involve lots of different technologies. Our cars, lights, language itself, and helping them to kind of ensure that default of the use of that word doesn't immediately go to the kind of high tech narrative that is reinforced. So that's an important note, and good distinction for you to kind of raise at the start of this conversation, because we are going to be talking a lot about language as this technology that's influencing things, particularly when it comes to generative AI and large language models. But we've got the world's kind of burning and water being used to cool data centers. The material impact of the trajectory of these technologies is in public discourse, but still not quite enough. And we're so detached from the impact of our use of these technologies, and we talk about the water usage of training large language models, and even the ongoing maintenance and running of these systems on all the physical data centers that exist around the world, and the energy requirements of them, but also the water requirements to actually cool them. And in regions like California on the western side of the United States, where California is quite dry, and a former large body of water that existed in that part of the continent is no longer there because of water management practices or water redistribution practices to support the agriculture in that valley kind of basin. So it's a good reminder that like our these decisions have this material impact on the ecologies that we rely upon for life, and impact the body of Gaia, of the Earth, in all these unseen ways that we're usually not very cognizant of.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to water in California, it's interesting because a lot of it, most of it, is owned by corporations and even individuals, which is ridiculous. And it's another symptom of our system. But you mentioned the word detach, right? And I think that's an interesting word, being detached from the body, because I think the worship we have of digital and mechanic based technology also influenced how we see our own bodies and the stories we tell about human bodies, because what's become prevalent is this mechanistic view of the human body, which obviously further supports the story of separation, humans from nature, like it's separate thing, and obviously shapes how we view all these resources, and that makes it seem like okay for corporations to own access to water and own access to land even, right, and claim ownership over some body of land, which probably is a public good, not just for humans but more than human life as well.
Yeah.
So it's we have a rich history, right? And it's been quite intentional, obviously, to justify a lot of the colonization and claiming ownership over all sorts of the bodies of the land, but also, as we know, we have quite a not pleasant history of slavery, right? Claiming ownership over human bodies and labeling certain human bodies as less than, so we can justify the exploitments of said human bodies. And that's continuing, obviously, with in the realm of digital technologies that are promoted as clean and kind of digital in the cloud, but are built on top of the bodies of miners, of precious resources in Congo, of on top of bodies of moderators that are being exploited and given PTSD with basically little support on how difficult it is to moderate all this content. So there's a lot of invisible bodies, right? And there's like an excellent book as well, Ghost Work, about that topic for anyone that wants to dig deeper. And I'm totally blanking on the author. We'll add it to the
Add it
notes.
to the show notes.
Yeah. But yeah, this mechanistic view, right? We have come to worship all mechanical technology, and also in turn that worship has turned us into or trying to turn ourselves into machines, and we are detached from so many parts of us that you already mentioned before, which is why we also we'll try to bring a bit of woo in this podcast and maybe mention some some aspects of human bodies that aren't usually discussed, especially in tech circles.
Bring more woo,
Yeah.
which is important, and as a nature of language, we had one of our podcasts, we talked about bringing more woo into the language, because so much of the language and content and information that's being put and created and put online, that's being used to retrain and train these large language models, needs to kind of push to the edge of the bell curves in terms of the way that we think about the world, the way that we think about ourselves, our relationships, our relationship to the world, life and the universe, and that can counter some of the narrowing of the way that language shapes our perceptions, and that injecting more woo into our content and discussions and kind of discourse is valuable as a counteracting force to the narrowing of the bell curve in terms of the statistical distribution of language.
Yeah, and also being cautious and a bit suspicious about the words we tend to use, especially in the field of artificial intelligence, even though we're artificial intelligence, and we dove deeper into the word intelligence and the origins of that word in the previous episode of our podcast, but also the word learning when it comes to machine learning and how machines are learning. And we said this parallel, right? And we now compare machine learning to human learning, which in some ways devalues what the complex processes that go into human learning, because it's not just our brains and our neurons and our natural neural networks that are involved in learning, right? We learn through full-bodied experience. We learn with our gut. We learn through all our senses. And by just using this mechanistic language, learning is just like an ingestion of facts. And we see that obviously, we both also work in the field of education and instructional design, and how we design learning experiences in quotes as if we were just machines that need to read a certain text and then be quizzed, and that's we label that as learning, which is obviously far from actual real learning. So yeah, language is really important, and obviously language is core to generative AI, particularly, right? If we now shift more our focus to generative AI, because they are, we say that these models are learning, but they're only learning a part of what it means to be human and a small part of what we are able to express in different types of languages. Also, when we're talking about text, images, or videos, so different modalities of language as well. But there's so much that the embodied experience, right? The full experience of having a body and being in communication, in interaction with other bodies, is not something that can really be learned if we are not able to express it in language. And we know that there are so many things we don't have the right words for, right? And we struggle to express the full. I mean, I think we probably need a new word just for the period of time we're in.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how to describe my feelings anymore.
I think this is language itself is this organic, evolving thing that evolves through use, but through use as we use it together to shape our perceptions, describe our experiences. And I think given the revealing that we're seeing with so much complexity, COVID was a really interesting example of that, because it did expose and help reveal to so many people, even people that are in the so-called upper echelons of decision making in terms of our civilizational structures, just the fragility of our supply chains and the interconnection of things. So now we're seeing this acceleration of novelty and weirdness that's taking place in the world. I mean, it's like the great revealing. It's like, oh yeah, aliens are real. We've and people are just so, it's kind of like you would think like 15, 20 years ago, if you said the government of the United States has formally come out and legit said, yes, they're real. These phenomena that we've been seeing, had all this exposure, people would have just like gone wild 20 years ago. But now, like, it's kind of like just brush it off, news cycle. People are so fucking more concerned with, I don't know, making sure that the next paycheck can cover their bills and support their families to be able to live, given the rising cost of living in so many countries at the moment. So we're living in this weird time. So sometimes we need new words to describe the experiences and the processes and the things that might be playing out where our current words kind of fail us. And this dives into the interesting part when so much of our language is being colonized by big tech and and has been for quite some time in terms of like modern day infrastructure that is our web that we're interacting with, and we're interacting with over right this moment, that's controlled by large companies, and to some degree a whole bunch of, I don't know, 5 eyes, 7 eyes, 17 eyes, however many eyes we call them, with the kind of different intelligence and security organizations, that flow of information is kind of managed and controlled. Now it's like we need sometimes a shift to, maybe the art and the symbolic and, the storying and the woo stuff, because, like an artist is able to, through art, describe the ineffable. Now they're not describing it in written language. Sometimes, an artist as a poet might be like Rumi or something like that, but um that's an interesting play here, because that might be there might be an attempt to try and colonize the meaning of art and decode the patterns of what people find appealing as art, because there's been lots of debate and discussion on this for eons around what is art, and it's always shifting and moving and evolving with the times, because art itself is contextual, and the meaning is usually open for interpretation by the person that has a relationship with that art as an observer and consumer of art. So I think there's an interesting interplay. The woo and the artistic, the mystical and the magical needs to actually be more present in the way that we relate to each other, because it's much harder to colonize that with these systems.
Yeah, but also as more people start relying on AI tools, particularly generative AI tools, to write or create in whatever context, there is the danger of these AI models further simplifying the language we use and further guiding us towards the great simplification, if we can use that phrase, right? So we have run the danger of converging towards like some sort of statistical mean of language that obviously these large language models are particularly good at. And one of our pet peeves, I think, is the fact that people are now labeling words like delve and tapestry as too fancy, right? Because AI, ChatGPT is using them, and we're obviously confused because we do like fancy words, and we do like to expand our vocabulary through reading, and sometimes you need a word like delve to convey the real meaning, and we probably need more words like that convey specific meanings. And when we're talking obviously about how tech influences language, right, we cannot also go past the fact that English is kind of become the lingua franca of the tech world, and consequently of the globalized world, which in itself is a weird kind of language, uh, right? That's also emerged from many different people's meeting together, and is kind of simplified in its design, and often borrows a lot of words from other languages. But it's interesting in the context of AI, for instance. I recently updated my computer to the latest version of Mac OS with Apple Intelligence, right? And it promises me writing tools, help me write, and all of that, but it's in English only. Further, reinforcing that like intelligence is something now that belongs to English. And the performance of these large language models are not as good with smaller, less well represented languages, like Slovenian, for instance, where there's not as much data to ingest, right, to get to that statistical mean of language. But it's also interesting, the research around model collapse, right, and what it means, for instance, if people also start relying more on AI models to just create language and express themselves. I know you have some interesting commentary on that and the distribution.
Yeah, and it's a being studied much more like from a data science perspective, and the large companies and organizations that are developing these technologies are very well aware of the risks that's associated with this concept of model collapse, where the system doesn't have enough diversity in its training corpus to retrain, and essentially kind of collapses and no longer can essentially learn, because there's a narrowing again of like the statistical distribution of all these vectors in the vector space of these all these pieces of words, in a mathematical sense, that are in the space in which these neural networks work. So we are at risk of that as a result of the widespread use of these tools to influence and generate content, particularly when that content is like copy paste, like single shot prompt, like, and people just go, oh yeah, that's a great that's a great blog post, and then they put it online, and then all of a sudden, that's being scraped and used to build another training corpus, and we get stuck in these reinforcement loops, these recursive loops, where we kind of move towards a narrowing of the data and the representation of the world as well. So yeah, there's technical limitations to that. So like humans, we need to, for the benefit of the extractive industries that are big tech, like they want us to produce more content that is human generated and not influenced by these systems, because it gives them more data to be able to train them. So
Yeah, there's an opportunity to influence, right, what these models think and how they think by fitting them more woo. So that's maybe a way to be slightly subversive and influence our futures. But
mhm.
yeah, thinking we maybe civilization is heading towards language collapse as well if we do not invest enough in the diversity of language and keep evolving a language, which why it's probably good that especially Americans are now making an effort to learn Mandarin and expand their vocabulary, right? And maybe before we hit recording, actually we were talking about also the richness of these different alphabets and different writing styles and directions, right? That also influence our thought and actually feeds our, if I use a mechanistic metaphor for a bit here, feed our brains with more diversity, so that our brains as well, or our bodies, can keep evolving in the way we see the world and think about language, and maybe get better at more creative with language, right?
Mm. Yeah, I think, and that the influence of, as you were mentioning, the dominance and the hegemonic nature of the English language and its pervasiveness in technology, shaping the way that people think. Language shapes how we think about the world, particularly when we're we're using language in uh, common ways, which is, one of our practices is looking at the etymology of things and going into like, Latin roots, and like how language evolves is really interesting, and sometimes playing with that. And you do see the rebirth of new words come up and things like that. That's a natural process with language itself. But the difference between like Mandarin, or character logographic languages that have layers of meaning encoded in their symbols, and it's read, top to bottom, for instance, rather than kind of top left to bottom right, or even Arabic, or Hebrew, is different in structure. So that shapes our body. It shapes our physical body in the sense of our movements, because the reinforcement of particular reading styles shape the sensory motor cortex over time from a young age. And that leads to particular ways of orienting the body that tend to be more dominant than others. And there's a lot. There is research looking at these things, but I find it fascinating that you're getting Americans now, because of what's happened with the potential ban on TikTok, going and learning Mandarin, and might be some interesting aspects of that, particularly if it was combined with psychedelics and the evidence that shows that they increase the neuroplasticity potential of the brain. But I'm not saying that those that are learning Mandarin that are American because of what's happening with TikTok are doing that. Maybe some are. That would be great for them. So yeah, I think there's those dangers as well when we talk about the dominant force of a language like English, which abstracts away things, right? It's this super broad kind of language that is very, it is a colonizing language. It's a language of the colonizers, and it has this interesting way of kind of just taking from lots of different things, and the way that we abstract and detach from the world as a result of these languages influences the way that we think and creates these reinforcement loops. So the language itself reproduces the same value systems from which it originated.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, right? By learning a new language, obviously you learn about the culture of where of the people who speak that language and the land from which it originates. So there's some fascinating linguistics research that says that talks about how human language is shaped by climate and terrain. So the languages that emerge in hotter, more forested regions sound different to those from colder regions, right? And that's a fascinating body of research. And AI, right? Large language models are completely detached from that, from the land, right? They just see the words, the images, and so they're basically learning from just like a very limited mirror view of the language and the human experience, right? But they're missing the richness of the experience and the language. So yeah, there's like a lot of interesting research and probably a lot we don't know yet. But it's interesting, right? Language is where our human bodies and AI models are now sort of intersecting. And obviously what big tech believes they have is, they're just they believe they have managed to capture a larger part of the human experience through these language models than they probably have, because human bodies are not, we said about how they are being shaped by our languages, are being shaped by our land. So human bodies are not just the body of me as an individual, but also the bodies of the cats I live with, of the humans I interact with, the interactions you and I have regularly, right? All are shaping my body, and the trees around me. There's already some pollen in the air that's affecting certainly my breathing pathways. But we exist in the physical world for now, and we are being shaped by all these bodies, right? And the language you express probably expresses a very small part of that experience, because there's so much richness in that. And obviously AI silicon bodies have parts that are not necessarily expressed through language, but they are being influenced by all the systems that we already mentioned, especially the paradigm of extractive colonialism that is in misalignment with actual physical organic bodies, because it relies on exploitation of bodies to be created and maintained.
Yeah, so the continuation of colonizing and this extractive colonization of bodies and the things that haven't necessarily been categorized. And we've got a wonderful quote from Krishnamurti there that I think is worth reading out in full because it's quite pertinent. And Krishnamurti, if you've never come across him as a dear Pathfinder listening to this, look up his works. We'll put some references in the show notes, but um, uh, the quote is, do look at something, a tree, a child, a man, a woman, the sky, a flower, without naming, and you will see much more. There is no screen of words between you and the tree. Therefore, there is immediate contact with the fact, not to condemn, not to judge, not to evaluate, not to put into categories, is extraordinarily difficult because our training for centuries has been to categorize, to be aware of the process of the brain, which puts everything into a category, is the beginning of seeing the fact. And what this really gets at is quite important for us in the trajectory that I think we're going on, and it is a continuation, which is the colonization of everything. And now we're seeing the colonization of anything that can be described in a language, which I think is scary because we start getting into the desire to decode the languages of plants and nature and animals. And yeah, sure, I talk to my dogs already, I talk to the trees already. It is in a language that probably is encoded in my DNA, my deep ancestral past, in ways that I'm becoming more attuned to because I'm putting intention into that process. But as we get into this way of organizing, categorizing everything, we turn it into something that is about command and control, to create certainty, and we lose the magic and wonder in just experiencing the world as a result of that. So I think this kind of gets at something actually quite pertinent and profound in terms of the direction that we're going, that we start shaping the very fabric of the experience, and we will become quite trapped in a path where everything is about everything is decoded and turned into a language that can be managed by, I don't know, AGIs that are controlled by the tech bureaucracy.
Yeah, and it's also connected to the business model. If you look at a platform, like Meta, they want to put you in a box and put you in a category so they know you're more likely to click on a certain ad. That's what the game is about for them, even though I don't know if they still have the slogan of connecting people, but they're actually in the business of connecting advertisers to people, right? That's what they're getting paid to, and that's what they optimize. So this decategorization is obviously especially an important part of our digital technology development because, by design of computers and programming languages, you have to categorize things. Although now, obviously, LLMs have a bit of more maybe freer interpretation of language, and everything is not necessarily as categorized as it is in some other types of machine learning, especially it's like supervised machine learning where you categorize things in advance. But at the same time, LLMs also learned a lot from these data sets that were labeled with some made up categories. So that also has downstream effects, and it's where a lot of our biases come from, which leads us to where these technocrats want to get, and what they've been talking about, the tech bros. They keep talking about building super intelligent AGI, and obviously this whole what Timothy Gebru and Emil P. Torres called the testicle bundle of ideologies, where they want, it's their stated goal to transcend the limitations of earthian bodies and the physical reality, and usher us into a techno-utopia of transhumanism and extopia and singularity, and what else is in that bundle. It's all kind of a big yeah, a big bundle of paradigms that basically don't value the physical bodies, and put this concept, the colonial concept of intelligence, as being better than, and control and hierarchies. That's what they try to emphasize, and what they would like to see, right? And they're trying to build technology from Elonia's Neuralink, to basically absorb all humanity into technology. But the big question is, where does like the rest of our planet fit in their view, right? Even if we upload our consciousness into the cloud, the cloud still has data center somewhere. So that's unclear, right? Whether they envision our future as a matrix like body battery farm, and like who's maintaining that infrastructure, that is unclear. Or whether they just see themselves transcending the limitations of human bodies and expect the rest of us to maintain their body battery farms. Or it's kind of unclear where they want to take us, but that's their stated goal, right? It's not something now we're coming up and exaggerating as oh, this is gonna happen if we don't stop them. They are actually saying these things out loud, and promoting these ideologies and belief systems.
Yeah, it's uh, I think where they want to take things is, I guess, reasonably clear in terms of how things have been articulated for quite some time. And they're like Ray Kurzweil as a kind of big influential figure in that space, influencing a lot of people, like and that's the S in the Tescrial bundle for the singularity. That set of perspectives has influenced the trajectory and thinking of a lot of these people that have a disproportionate amount of power in terms of the decision of how these technologies get designed and developed. So and that is a world where the human body is a limitation, and you transcend that, and you're transcending that to find a closer relationship with the fundamental intelligence of the universe and the cosmos, so that you become as intelligent as the universe. So it's a spiritual ideology that sees the physical body as something to transcend, and that does not factor in probably some of the physical constraints in even getting to that. Whatever AGI is, I think the definitions are kind of floating around and morphing at the moment, but the human body doesn't factor into that future in terms of the trajectory. And I think in our conversation that we had with the energetic force of the full moon and its mystical influence on us, was really getting into this belief or way of understanding that all our creations reflect our energy, the energy that we have in our bodies. We're a bioelectromagnetic energetic field. That is our body. We've got this a wave particle duality aspect to the experience of reality, that we're both energy wave as well as particle at the same time. But when we think about, creating a food dish. Now, if you're angry and frustrated and there's no love, and you can probably relate to this, that it's like this dish in this restaurant, or this pizza that was made, there's no love in that pizza. I can fucking taste it. There's no love in that pizza. um uh and the same goes for our technology. Our technology is a reflection of all the energy of the bodies that go into its creation. So what does our current tech reflect and mirror back to us? And if we think of the key decision makers in a lot of these organizations and the key thinkers that tend to be prominent, like it does reflect quite a toxic masculine kind of peak trauma culture, where whatever the level of trauma is being held in the bodies of the Silicon Valley tech bureaucracy. I can only imagine, particularly if you come from, privileged backgrounds, there tends to be quite a toxic flow-on effect, from the masculine figures in people's lives, as a result. And it's the statements from Zuck recently. I mean, that was just like gobsmacking. Like, what the fuck are you? You know, we need more masculine energy.
And more aggression specifically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like, wow, this
Yeah.
is this
So
is this is
yeah.
amazing.
Can you imagine how different our technology would be if it was built by people who were hugged and loved a lot as children, and were happy, fulfilled adults, not teenagers trying to prove themselves to their peers, and probably with some underlying daddy issues. And yeah, we're looking at you, Elon. um yeah, it's all that accumulated trauma, right, and the shadows from centuries of colonialism, extractions, because we all, as those of us who live in Western society. So if you're listening to this podcast, you're part of that system, probably, right? We have to kind of go through that cognitive dissonance of learning how all these products, like even our clothes, are being made, our technologies, how they're being made through extraction and exploitation. We have to, we are now, it's clear that our planet's uh vital signs are flashing red, right? It's not looking good for our climate, and it's not just about CO2 in the air, right? It's all these different ecosystems that are suffering as a result of our zeal and the trauma we have inflicted on the body of the planet and different species, not just ourselves. And it's interesting, yeah, when we talk about this toxic masculinity and language of domination and control, and their aspirations to master the mysteries of the cosmos and the universe, right? What's built in that is a complete disdain for the earthly, for the bodily. And that's obviously related to the fact that we've been treating the planet, and if we want to call it Mother Earth, as a commodity. And we've been treating human bodies as a commodity as well. Whereas, if we maybe did more witchcraft and earthiness, and we're more grounded to the earth, maybe we would be building very different technologies. But it's different, right, that from that tension and our result trauma and all these shadows in Silicon Valley, they are affecting our technology, and the tension between what the makers and founders of the tech want and what life needs and what our human bodies intuitively feel they need is growing stronger. Because, I mean, especially now, it seems that these companies are just like pushing these Gen AI features onto us, and people are like, who needs this? I was just like yesterday, my Logitech software updated, and they tried to get me to use some sort of AI prompt builder in the software I use to control my mouse. And I'm like, I just need this app to load quickly, and load the key mapping I need to do my work. I don't see how I could benefit from AI on my mouse, right? I just, do your job well. And they're pushing this, AI features that nobody's asking for, and people are like, I don't know what to use this for. And it's clear, right, that they've completely lost track, and they want to just absorb our human bodies and do everything with AI, because all they can think about is this mechanistic view of our body, and they think that all we care about is productivity and doing things more faster, right? um, and we had an episode as well on how we spend the time that technology is saving as well. So there's this tension, and we're all feeling it, especially with current events. I think it's very clear. So during our full moon gathering, we kind of ask a provocative questions, right? Whether the answer, like, given how weird and tense things are getting, whether we should just do more ayahuasca or some other psychedelics to resolve all these traumas.
Yeah. And the segue that led to, and it was coming in the conversation that we had for the full moon gathering, was about like the trauma. And you've got these amazing plant medicines that have been used for tens of thousands of years in traditional wisdom cultures, be that in Central America, South America. There's evidence of psychedelic use across many different cultures. In Africa, you've got ibogaine, which I think is seeing quite a revival here. But these types of technologies, when the right set and setting is there and the integration can take place, have extraordinary potential in supporting the somatic healing that's necessary for a lot of these tech bros. But what we're seeing is like, they're taking the trip, right? They're trying to use it as a growth hack, fucking go on a vision quest, or, I'm going to go to Burning Man and all of a sudden I'm fucking enlightened, or, I did a 3-day ayahuasca ceremony with my tech bros. So yeah, there's no embodiment in that process. There's no preparation. There's no ritual. And some of them may be doing that. They might be actually legit taking it seriously, and there's a genuine recognition to do the shadow work that's required, because they've acknowledged like all this trauma that they're holding on because daddy told me fucking no, or hit me, or whatever, or didn't show me love, and mum wouldn't hug me. That might be genuinely a path that's being pursued by people within those communities. But I think what we're seeing, at least what can be seen through our consumption of information describing the way that these people think, you might see a conversation on Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman talking about this stuff, and it's become quite common that doing ayahuasca, doing psychedelics is seen as this kind of growth hack, or microdosing, and as this kind of nootropic kind of way of increasing my ability to focus, my lateral kind of thinking, rather than the extraordinary gifts that these technologies of consciousness can give us, to help us heal and detoxify all this psychic trauma that we're holding in our individual and collective bodies.
Yeah, they just, again, want to prove how cool they are. And I mean, like, Nouri is trying harder than Mark Zuckerberg at trying and failing as hard as Zuck. Yeah, they want to be the cool bros that go to Burning Man, but then they have a luxurious RV with all the equipment, but then they brag about having this enlightening experience for the weekend, because obviously on mind that they have they think they have to be back at the office so they can supervise their minions and bestow their intelligence onto them. So yeah, there's this danger if you go into that sort of experiences with unprocessed trauma. You often end up amplifying your existing shadows. And yeah, there's a recent really excellent discussion on the topic of psychedelics on the Accidental Gods podcast that we'll link in the show notes. An interview with Chris Bach, the author of LSD and the Mind of the Universe, that really goes perhaps deeper than we have time to go into today. But yeah, like you said, this can be wonderful technologies, and we put this question as a bit of provocation, but obviously, this is a technology that should be combined with other somatic bodily healing techniques, right? That can help you face your traumas. But obviously, yeah.
And I think that the importance as well is, our current social structures are, we're atomized in so much of our lives.
Yeah.
Like, this hyper individualism makes I believe the integration that you get from deep work with plant medicines very, very challenging, and likely takes much longer than if you are in a deeply communal kind of set of relationships where your everyday living is in communion with the other Earthians around you, both human and non-human, and the integration is natural because your insights that you will get generally are going to help you to see those patterns. So you're seeing those patterns, whereas if you're coming, into kind of modern industrial society and you're living in, the ways that we're kind of forced to, because the architecture of our cities and whatnot, it makes integration much more challenging. So along with the somatic healing technologies, and I think we need the social healing technologies, we need a repatterning of our social structure to support that process. So do we need more psychedelics? Maybe in combination with an n number of other factors in terms of the way that we live, relate, be, make, create, and be in the world. So they do have extraordinary opportunity. And I think from some of the things that I've been reading, Daniel Pinchbeck, if some of you listeners may be familiar with him, but we'll drop that in the show notes. He shared a recent talk and making reference to, it's quite possible that the legalization of some of these compounds might accelerate as a result of Trump, which is an interesting prospect. And I didn't get to watch the talk that Daniel had with a Jewish Buddhist psychonaut talking about these things, but it does raise like an interesting prospect. Like you've got this tension where the availability of these compounds is there, which has restricted their use for healing and things like that. But I would likely say that we'll see a tendency towards do the trip, not the kind of somatic trauma processing that is actually what's needed. So yeah, it's interesting. Trump age, what does it bring? Widespread psychedelic use, yay. The acceleration of fucking weirdness, yay. Us,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
who knows? Oh,
but
God.
it's worth reminding ourselves of the ethos of Silicon Valley, and especially Zuck, right? Move fast, break things.
Yeah.
And they're really living that ethos right now. But perhaps Zuck should reconsider of changing that ethos to move slow and break self first, right? You have to go through that process of death and rebirth of the self, and get over your traumas, right? Like deal with your need to prove yourself and be the cool dude first before you start breaking the fucking world for the rest of us, right? So here's a suggestion for them, right? Move
Yeah.
slow, break self first. And then
Love
you
it.
will see if you still want to break things on the word, sorry, on the word scale, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the trajectory of this TESCREAL pathway is one of the body is not present. To answer our kind of question, where's the body fit into this kind of AI future of at least the dominant narrative that is being constantly reinforced through so much of the hubris that we're seeing over the past 18 months to 2 years. And
Yeah.
it's one, our conversation was like that. It's a dead end. It's like, it's not possible. Like you can't actually get to this point because you are neglecting the body that enables that pathway to continue, which is all the human bodies and the body of the planet. So do we end up in a matrix like kind of like system? I don't think so. I think it's like an impossibility. Maybe a possibility in some other dimension or some other universe, if we want to think about it like that. But the radical transformation that's needed as a result of the deeply complex challenges that we face as a species requires us to shift. And I think as a kind of broader super organism, where we're seeing a shift in perspective. We're seeing, a clash of triangles as patterns that are much more about control and hierarchy and the domination of the symmetry of nature versus like the circular patterns, like circular economics and circular design, like thinking about like the right to repair movement, circular design momentum, donut economics, designing cities around circular economies. I think we're getting a shift taking place. Can that happen fast enough? Is probably the question, because our planet's kind of warning lights are flashing red, and cascading effects in these systems is 100% likely. It's just very difficult to predict. So we don't have the models to be able to predict them. And what we tend to find is the most comprehensive modeling of what's taking place, and this is, like you reinforce, it's not just about CO2 and methane. Like there's complex interactions taking place as a result of all the human activity that we're engaged in, that where we're generally saying, oh shit, it's much worse than we thought it was going to be. And that's kind of like, that's been pretty consistent over the past 2-3 years. We're seeing like, a lot of the dominant, the prominent scientists that are basically saying, some of them like, I, getting very pessimistic over the prospects for the survival of our species. So I think like what is going to be the catalyst for radical transformation, or is absent a kind of cosmic event and global cataclysm, um, do we have this future where it's like AI small, hasn't usurped everything. It's still one of the types of technologies that we use in terms of digital technologies, but we're coming back into a better attunement with the regenerative principles of the universe of life on this planet. Um, or is it wiping out of most of the human population, and
Yeah.
we whoever's left become the carriers of that traumatic event, and we have to go through that whole learning cycle as the next variation of Homo sapiens 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 on the planet.
Yeah, because we're not, especially when talking about climate change, it's not just about the carbon footprint and the CO2 we emit as we, there's now raised awareness, especially thanks to generative AI, about water use. And obviously we're also polluting our own bodies. If we just like look at the research that shows that microplastics is basically in all parts of our bodies. And that probably has an influence on, the collective body of the earth as well. And I don't know, is there more microplastics in Silicon Valley perhaps, and that's what is making this bros increasingly radical and wanting to ditch their human bodies because they realize we've poisoned our human bodies. Maybe that's why
it's not feasible to have a human body because we've poisoned them so much.
Or maybe we'll turn into artificial bodies just because of the amounts of microplastics and other materials that we're absorbing through the everything we consume. You started with food. Microplastic is also in our food, and we're poisoning the food ecosystems of other species as well.
It's in the first poos that a baby does after they're born, which shows that it's in the bloodstream of the mothers and being transferred over into that fetus and child developing in the womb through the umbilical cord. So we've got these. We've traumatized ourselves, and our social bodies, our individual bodies, our ecological bodies, so much through the systems. And I think, in a grander scheme of things, that has been part of our journey. Like sometimes you have to make some serious fuck ups to realize that you're on the wrong fucking path. And can we collectively figure that out, I guess, is the deeper question of our time.
Yeah. And maybe, now it's a good time to also mention the Three Horizons future network, right? That can maybe help us think, because, it has the 3 lines of 3 possible future horizons. One in decline is business as usual, and that's probably, the vision of artificial intelligence or AGI fixing all our problems, fixing climate, saving humanity, becoming this mysterious savior. That's probably the line in decline, right? That these fire practitioners of Silicon Valley are trying to sell us on. So, but we have to figure out what is that, the viable future we want to get to, and how do we then start some sort of revolution that gets us closer and that bridges that gap, right?
Yeah, it's a really helpful way of thinking about the past, the present, and like a shared future, because we are seeing a realization that the current ways that we live are not in alignment to the needs of the ecologies that we rely upon to survive. And that's just like you have to acknowledge that, and if you don't, you stick your head in the sand. And there was a wonderful way of putting it from Manda Scott in one of her recent podcasts, where she's like, you either realize that stuff, or you're the ostrich putting your head in the sand, and then the big flood comes and then you fucking drown anyway. So you quickly jump out and realize the hole that you've got your head in is filling up with water. So I think the 3 horizons is a way of thinking about, okay, well, your horizon 1 is the business as usual. That's the shit that we need to just compost. That it's the stuff that no longer serves. Hospice to its
in the words of
right?
Vanessa Andreotti, right? Hospicing modernity. Excellent.
Yeah, which exactly, and that's it's a wonderful way to think about it. It's honoring the systems that have helped us to come to these realizations, and then there's the adjacent possible, which is, where the viable future, that, shared visions that we have of something that is more alignment to life, is emerging. And that exists in the present, that exists in the conversations that we might be having about, wiser ways to innovate, or, more regenerative practices, natural farming techniques, amazing work done with, in mycology to understand the way that fungus can help us solve some of these challenges, bio-led innovation and things like that. And that's here in the present. It's really about, like, how do we support that in accelerating? And that's what the H2 pathway is the innovation towards the more viable future that is in alignment to life. So what we're seeing now is the messy tension between a system that, systems that are broken because they're just not in alignment to life, and the birthing of, or so much of what wants to be born that is in alignment to life, that we're trying to nurture and encourage, through the womb. And that's a beautiful process, but sometimes, birth is painful, for the mother and the child.
Yeah, and there's new lessons to be learned from pain, and it takes usually more than a weekend. It takes time to integrate all these lessons as well. So yeah, and I think it's a good wrapping point for today's conversation on how do our human bodies fit into in a AI enabled future. It's we have to now actively make a choice of how do we want our bodies to fit. Are we okay with the vision that completely ignores the material world and says we should all be transcending our human bodies and forget about all live planet, and they don't really offer a plan on how's that going to work out for anyone who's not a billionaire? Or do we take now collective action and figure out ways to deal with our trauma, not just on an individual level but collective level, and start healing as people? And it's interesting because right now we are seeing some healing through conversations that are happening, for instance, between people from the US who are now TikTok refugees on Xiangshu, and they're talking to other bodies and realizing we're all just human. We want the same things. We just want to have a fulfilling life. We want to be able to afford groceries, food, a place to live, healthcare. And that's healing, to realize that we are on this planet together. We are more similar than different in so many ways. So that's some healing that's taking place. So I think going forward for 2025, this crazy roller coaster of a year, that's sure to be a pretty big chapter in history book, should our species survive. I think our job is to figure out how do we then start building something new. So the next episode, I think we should focus on collective future crafting in particular, because we can criticize the current ways and the current business as usual and all the Zucks and all the other rich fucks who apparently don't care about what happens to us. They say they're techno optimists, but they're all building doomsday bunkers as a backup plan. So that's, for me, doesn't really signify a strong belief in our immediate future. So for those of us who still care about our immediate future and don't have a backup bunker in New Zealand or wherever, we need to organize and come together and figure out how do we collectively future craft.
Yeah, that is the recognition of our time. I think if you're not the ostrich with your head in the ground, and you're observing all the signals and you're paying attention to what's actually happening in the world as best as possible, and you can feel it even if you're not I think there's there's like a feeling that people have at the moment, through the conversations that I'm having, and it's like it's that critical juncture that we're at, and at this point in time in our lives, like, what should I do? How should I be? How should I orient myself in the world? And what is it that I'm sensing uh, that is calling me to be a part of this great phase transition that can support us to be, you know, to survive and thrive as a species on this beautiful planet that we all call home.
Yeah, well said. And we don't have that answer, right? And we will have to find the answers together. And there's probably more answers than just one, right? Because the future, probably we should embrace diversity and a plurality in our future, and diverse rainbow mirrors of diverse perspectives.
Absolutely.
So any final words before we conclude?
I think that was a wonderful point to finish on. Maybe just that, don't lose your sense of humor despite all the weirdness and things that are happening. Try and orient yourself with love and humor towards some of this. I mean, feel the pain, feel the grief, feel the shame, feel the guilt, feel all those things, go through the feelings. But humor and play is what's going to help us through this, particularly when it comes from a place of love.
Wonderful. I have nothing more to add to that. So thank you for listening and pathfinding with us, everyone. If you enjoyed this exploration, share it with friends to inspire further discussions, leave a review, comment, or send us your thoughts at community@tactics.co. We're always happy to hear from you. And we're also extremely grateful to our paid subscribers on Substack who are able to support our work financially. We hope to continue inspiring collective pathfinding towards better tech futures, and every bit of support, whether financial or algorithmic, helps to keep us going. We invite you to embrace the lunacy of tech with smiles and love by subscribing to the Pathfinder's newsletter and joining our next full moon gathering. We sing our monthly reflections and gatherings to the lunar cycle as a reminder of our place in the universe and a commonality we share across time zones and places we inhabit. Pathfinder's podcast will return during the next waning moon. Until then, give the bodies around you a warm human hug and be mindful about the seeds of intention you plant and the stories you tell. There's magic in both.